On March 17, 1982, a spring began to unveil the harsh winter's secrets in the Ozark Hills of Missouri. An assistant social worker named Margaret Wilson visited an isolated cabin in Shannon County. What she discovered would forever alter her understanding of the extremes of social isolation and the consequences of institutional neglect within America's rural communities. The Shelton property sat 27 kilometers from the nearest town, Current River. It was accessible only by a dirt road that turned impassable during the spring rains. The family had lived virtually without contact with the outside world for more than 3 decades. Margaret's visit was prompted by an anonymous complaint to the Missouri Department of Social Services, which alleged children were living in unhealthy conditions and possibly suffering abuse. Upon arriving at the property, Margaret was met by Elijah Shelton, 47, a man of medium stature with a gray beard and intense blue eyes that seemed to carry the weight of generations of isolation. Elijah shared the cabin with his sister, Martha Shelton, 43, and 3 children, Thomas, 12, Sadie, 9, and little Jacob, just 5 years old. The cabin, built by Elijah's grandfather in the 1920s, was a wooden structure with 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, and a living room. The property included a small barn, a vegetable garden, and a well. There was no electricity or piped water. Their isolation was nearly total, with only occasional trips to town for supplies they couldn't produce themselves. The weather that day was mild, 17 degrees Celsius and partly cloudy. The recent thaw had left the ground around the cabin muddy, and the air carried the characteristic scent of wetland and decaying wood. During her initial inspection, Margaret noted the children showed signs of mild malnutrition and a lack of basic medical care. Thomas had a poorly healed scar on his right arm, the result of an axe accident the previous year. Sadie had a mild strabismus that had never been treated. Jacob, the youngest, showed signs of developmental delay for his age. What caught Margaret's attention, however, were the striking physical similarities between the children and the 2 adults. All shared pronounced features, the same intense blue eyes, the same facial bone structure, the same ear shape, characteristics that suggested not just kinship, but a very close consanguinity. When asked about the children's mother, Elijah hesitated before answering that his wife had died during Jacob's delivery. Martha remained silent, avoiding eye contact with the social worker. It was at this moment Margaret began to suspect the story made little sense. County records held no marriage certificate for Elijah Shelton. In fact, the only documents found were the birth certificates of Elijah and Martha, children of Harold and Edith Shelton, and a land deed dated 1924. The children had no official birth certificates. The Shelton family had gradually withdrawn after the death of Elijah and Martha's parents in a 1973 fire. Since then, the siblings had severed almost all ties with the local community, visiting town only for basic necessities. Current River residents described Elijah as a reserved, suspicious man who avoided prolonged interactions. The first suspicions that Martha might be the children's biological mother began to form in Margaret's mind as she observed the family dynamics. The way Jacob clung to Martha's skirts, how she intuitively knew each child's needs, and how her gaze revealed a deep maternal bond that went beyond that of an aunt. If you want to follow more cases like this, cases that shake society and reveal hidden truths, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any investigation. The formal investigation into the Shelton case began on March 24, 1982, a week after Margaret Wilson's initial visit. The Missouri Department of Social Services, together with the Shannon County Sheriff, sent a team to assess the situation. The team consisted of Margaret, Deputy David Tanner, and Dr. Robert Hayes, a pediatrician. The first obstacle the team encountered was Elijah's resistance. Confronted with more direct questions about the children's origin, he became defensive, insisting authorities had no right to interfere in his family's life. "We take care of our own," he repeated, a phrase later revealed to be loaded with disturbing meaning. Martha, in turn, remained largely silent, answering only in monosyllables when questioned directly. The children demonstrated a mix of curiosity and fear toward the visitors, betraying their limited contact with anyone outside the family core. Dr. Hayes performed basic physical exams and observed several worrying signs. Beyond mild malnutrition and a lack of preventive care, he noted physical characteristics that could indicate genetic issues consistent with endogamy. Thomas had polydactyly, an extra finger on his left hand. Sadie had dental development problems, and Jacob showed signs of cognitive impairment more severe than initially perceived. These signs, observed in isolation, can have various causes, Dr. Hayes explained in his report. But when seen together, added to the shared physical traits and family isolation, they raise serious concerns about possible consanguinity. The investigation took a more precise turn when the team gained access to the family's sparse medical records. In 1970, Martha had been treated at a hospital in a neighboring county following a domestic accident. The attending physician had noted she was approximately 3 months pregnant. Yet, there was no record of any birth or adoption that year. A deeper search revealed a pattern. Martha had been seen at different regional hospitals in 1970, 1973, and 1977, years roughly corresponding to the births of Thomas, Sadie, and Jacob. Each time, she had used different names, but basic physical descriptions and medical data indicated it was the same person. The investigation hit a significant obstacle when Elijah, sensing the direction of events, barred investigators from the property. Legally, without concrete evidence of severe abuse or neglect, authorities had limited options for intervention. It was then that a crucial witness came forward. Sarah Jenkins, an 83-year-old woman living about 5 kilometers from the Shelton property, contacted Margaret after hearing rumors of the investigation. Sarah revealed she had been a friend of Edith, Elijah, and Martha's mother, and had maintained sporadic contact with the family even after their isolation. Edith was always afraid something like this would happen, Sarah said. Harold kept the family isolated, saying the world was corrupt and they could only trust their own blood. When they died in that fire, I tried to help the children, but Elijah was already too much like his father, suspicious, hostile. Sarah revealed she had visited the cabin a few times after the parents' death, bringing supplies and offering help. During one visit in 1971, she noticed Martha was visibly pregnant. When she asked about it, Elijah threw her off the property and forbade her return. I should have done something then, Sarah lamented. But who would have believed me? And where would those children have ended up? The system doesn't take good care of our own out here. Sarah's testimony provided crucial context, but it wasn't definitive proof. The investigation needed concrete evidence to intervene. A turn came when an agent reviewing the birth records of Elijah and Martha discovered something intriguing. Their parents, Harold and Edith Shelton, had shared the same surname before marriage. Subsequent research revealed they were first cousins. It's not unheard of in isolated communities like this, explained a local historian consulted by the team. In the early decades of the 20th century, many families in these mountainous regions lived so cut off that marriages between close relatives occurred due to a lack of options. In some cases, it became almost a family tradition, justified by beliefs about blood purity. This discovery cast new light on the case. This wasn't just a possible incestuous relationship between Elijah and Martha, but potentially a pattern of generational endogamy that had intensified over time. The team developed a new theory. Elijah and Martha's parents, already first cousins, had passed isolationist beliefs to their children. After the parents died, the siblings, already socially isolated and possibly influenced by distorted ideas of family and purity, entered an incestuous relationship resulting in 3 children. The investigation briefly encountered another obstacle when a local resident claimed to have seen a different woman on the Shelton property in the early 1970s. This information momentarily supported the idea of a third person, perhaps a wife of Elijah's who later disappeared. However, subsequent investigation revealed the witness had likely confused the property or the date. Sheriff John Pearson, in light of the allegations, began considering a court order to collect DNA samples from the children and adults. The legal process, however, was complicated, especially given the family's isolation and the lack of conclusive evidence of abuse justifying such an invasive step. We have to move carefully here, argued the sheriff. These people have lived this way for generations. To them, this is normal. If we invade that property without concrete evidence, we could lose any chance of actually helping those children. The investigation reached an impasse that would last several months. During that time, social services maintained regular visits to monitor the children's well-being and gradually try to build trust with the family. The real turning point in the Shelton case came in September 1982, 6 months after the investigation began. During one of her routine visits, Margaret Wilson noticed Jacob, the youngest, had a high fever and signs of a severe respiratory infection. Despite Elijah's initial resistance, she convinced him to allow the child to be taken to the hospital in West Plains, the nearest sizable city. At the hospital, Dr. Michael Brennan, a genetic specialist consulted on the case, performed more in-depth tests with Elijah's reluctant consent. Jacob's test results revealed multiple subtle congenital anomalies that, individually, might have gone unnoticed, but together formed a pattern consistent with a high degree of consanguinity. The genetic markers we're seeing here, Dr. Brennan told the team, are typical of children born from a union between first-degree relatives. This shows excessive homozygosity even for first-cousin parents. During Jacob's 2-week hospitalization for pneumonia complications, Martha remained constantly at his side, displaying striking maternal care and anxiety. It was during this period, physically and emotionally exhausted, that Martha finally began to open up to Margaret. One night, as Jacob slept under medication, Martha shared fragments of her story. She spoke of the growing isolation after their parents' death, how Elijah gradually assumed the role of family patriarch, and how the boundaries between family roles became blurred. "We didn't know anyone else," Martha confessed in a near whisper. "Elijah said the outside world wanted to tear us apart, to hurt us. We could only trust each other." While Martha didn't explicitly admit to being the children's biological mother in this conversation, her words and emotions made the situation increasingly clear to Margaret. The social worker, taking extreme care not to break the fragile trust being built, avoided direct questions about paternity, focusing instead on offering emotional support. Meanwhile, the documentary investigation continued. A significant advance occurred when researchers located a traveling pastor, Reverend Samuel Miller, who had visited isolated Ozark communities in the 1960s and 70s. Reverend Miller kept detailed diaries of his visits, including observations on families he encountered. An entry dated June 1969 described a visit to the Shelton property, visited the Shelton family today. Their parents recently died in tragic circumstances, leaving 2 adult children, Elijah, 34, and Martha, 30. Found them living in extreme poverty and isolation. Offered spiritual and material assistance but was met with suspicion, especially by the young man, Elijah. Something in the dynamic between the siblings felt disturbing. Martha seemed submissive, almost fearful. "I fear that without the moderating influence of their parents, isolationist as they were, the situation may deteriorate. I intend to return, but confess I feel powerless." A later entry from April 1971 was even more revealing, returned to the Shelton property after nearly 2 years. Was prevented from entering by Elijah, who seemed even more hostile and paranoid. From a distance, I glimpsed Martha briefly. She appeared to be in an advanced state of pregnancy. When I mentioned this to Elijah, suggesting they might need medical attention, he became furious, accused me of spreading lies, and threatened assault if I did not leave immediately. I reported my concerns to the local sheriff, but was told that without concrete evidence of abuse, nothing could be done. These mountains keep their secrets, and I fear some are too dark for the light of day. Reverend Miller's diary provided the first contemporary evidence of Martha's pregnancy, corroborating the investigation's suspicions. Another crucial event occurred when authorities located medical records from a Springfield hospital where a Mary Smith had been treated in 1977. The records confirmed she had been hospitalized in advanced labor and had given birth to a boy with multiple health complications, including respiratory issues and a minor heart defect. The birth date coincided with Jacob's approximate age. The medical team had noted concerns about possible genetic abnormalities and suggested further tests, but Mary Smith had discharged herself and the baby against medical advice as soon as they were stabilized. While Jacob recovered, Dr. Brennan, with limited judicial authorization, performed additional tests revealing the boy had a rare genetic condition called Apert syndrome, characterized by malformations of the skull, face, hands, and feet. This syndrome can occur spontaneously, but its incidence increases significantly with close consanguinity. Based on the mounting evidence, Judge Eleanor Simmons issued a warrant authorizing DNA tests for all members of the Shelton family. The results, obtained in November 1982, were conclusive. Elijah was the biological father and Martha the biological mother of all 3 children. Leave a comment. Never give up on the truth if you believe all cases of family abuse deserve investigation, no matter how isolated the community. On December 7, 1982, based on the genetic evidence and testimony gathered, Elijah Shelton was formally charged with incest, a Class D felony in Missouri punishable by up to 4 years in prison. Martha, considered a victim due to evidence of prolonged psychological coercion, faced no criminal charges, but her fitness to care for the children was questioned in court. Elijah Shelton's trial began in February 1983, attracting significant regional media attention despite efforts to maintain discretion and protect the children's privacy. The Shannon County Court hosted one of the most complex and morally challenging cases in its history. During the trial, Elijah's defense, led by public defender Joel Thompson, argued that extreme isolation and the dysfunctional environment of his upbringing had compromised his ability to discern basic social and moral norms. Thompson presented evidence that Harold and Edith Shelton had deliberately isolated their children, depriving them of formal education and normal social contact. The defendant, argued Thompson, is a product of generational isolation and likely previous endogamy. He is himself the son of first cousins who raised him to believe the outside world was hostile and the family must remain unto itself. The prosecution, represented by Amanda Lewis, acknowledged the mitigating circumstances but maintained Elijah understood the nature of his actions. The defendant demonstrated the ability to interact with the community when necessary, to conduct basic business, and to deliberately hide the true nature of his relationship with his sister, Lewis argued. These are not the actions of someone unable to distinguish right from wrong. Martha Shelton testified behind closed doors. Edited excerpts later disclosed revealed a pattern of psychological manipulation that began after their parents' deaths, when she was 29 and Elijah was 33. According to Martha, Elijah gradually assumed complete control over every aspect of her life, isolating her further and convincing her the outside world threatened their safety and family unit. "He told me we were special," said Martha. "That our blood was pure, that our children would be strong because they wouldn't be contaminated by the outside world. At first I resisted, but after years alone with him, I started to believe." Dr. Richard Foster, a psychiatrist specializing in the effects of extreme isolation and abusive family dynamics, testified as an expert witness. He explained to the jury, "What we see here is a classic case of an alternative reality constructed through isolation. When a person is systematically excluded from all normative social references, their perception of what is acceptable can become radically distorted." The trial also highlighted the failure of local institutions to identify and intervene. Evidence showed concerns had been expressed by at least 3 different people over the years: Reverend Miller, neighbor Sarah Jenkins, and a clerk at the current River Supply store who had noticed the similarities between the children and adults. In no case was proper follow-up conducted by authorities, revealing systemic failures in monitoring isolated communities and protecting vulnerable individuals in remote rural areas. After 2 weeks of testimony, the jury found Elijah Shelton guilty of incest but recommended leniency due to mitigating circumstances. Judge Eleanor Simmons sentenced him to 3 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 18 months, and ordered compulsory psychological treatment. In her final statement, Judge Simmons noted, "This case represents a collective failure, not just of the defendant, who is nevertheless responsible for his actions, but of a society that allows entire families to fall outside our systems of protection and support. Geographical isolation must not mean institutional abandonment." As for the children, the court ordered they remain in temporary state custody while Martha received intensive psychological treatment. The ultimate goal was family reunification, provided Martha demonstrated the capacity to care for the children properly and integrate them into the broader community. The children were placed in a foster home in a neighboring county where they began receiving formal education and medical treatment for their various conditions. Thomas, the eldest, showed remarkable resilience and adaptability, rapidly catching up to his peers academically. Sadie faced more difficulty with social adaptation but responded well to treatment for her strabismus and other health issues. Jacob, the most severely affected by genetic disorders, underwent several surgeries to correct his malformations and began intensive therapy for his developmental delays. Comprehensive genetic testing revealed all 3 children carried multiple anomalies resulting from endogamy. Thomas had minor issues like polydactyly, surgically corrected, and a predisposition to certain autoimmune diseases. Sadie had more significant problems, including a rare enzymatic deficiency affecting her metabolism, requiring ongoing medication. Jacob, as identified, suffered from a Pert syndrome among other complications, necessitating lifelong medical care. The Shelton case prompted significant policy changes in Missouri and neighboring states. The Shelton Act, passed by the state legislature in 1985, established stricter protocols for monitoring families in isolated areas, including regular social worker visits and wellness checks for all children, regardless of formal complaints. Elijah Shelton served 22 months of his sentence before being released on parole in 1985. As a condition, he was prohibited from returning to the family property while the children were in Martha's care and had to undergo continued therapy and supervision. Martha, after 2 years of intensive therapy, regained custody of the children in 1984. With state assistance, she moved to a small house on the outskirts of West Plains, where the children continued their education and medical treatments. She earned her GED and eventually found work as a library assistant. The Shelton family's story continued to evolve over the following decades. Thomas overcame the adversities of his upbringing, graduated with a degree in social work, and dedicated his career to helping vulnerable children. Sadie faced more struggles with chronic health and psychological challenges related to her past, but found stability as an artist and artisan. Jacob, despite his physical and cognitive limitations, achieved a semi-independent life with community support and became an advocate for disability rights in rural areas. The Shelton case remains an iconic study in schools of social work and law across the country, illustrating the complex intersections of geographic isolation, rural poverty, dysfunctional family dynamics, and institutional failure. It also highlights the physical and psychological impacts of endogamy, not just on the directly affected children, but on subsequent generations. In 2002, 20 years after the initial discovery, a retired Margaret Wilson reflected on the case in a newspaper interview. "What stays with me most, looking back, is how something so extreme could happen practically in plain sight. It wasn't a cabin in the middle of nowhere, it was less than 30 kilometers from a town, in a county with resources and institutions supposedly designed to protect the vulnerable. It makes you wonder how many other similar cases exist, hidden in remote valleys or in plain view, waiting for someone to pay attention." The original Shelton property, abandoned for years, was eventually sold by the state in 1990. The cabin collapsed over time, but the land remains a silent testament to how extreme isolation can distort reality and perpetuate cycles of harm across generations.